What happens when one of music's biggest legends walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to tear him down? It only took 42 seconds of Denise Welch's first question for the entire interview to spiral into one of the most shocking and uncomfortable moments in British television history. This is the story of how Elton John, the man who had conquered stages around the world, found himself in a battle he never saw coming, and how one host's outrageous behavior led to an exit that nobody could have predicted. The Loose Women studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. The panel was set, the audience was seated, and the cameras were ready to roll. Today's guest was supposed to be a dream booking for any talk show. Elton John, legendary musician, cultural icon, and one of the most beloved figures in entertainment history, was scheduled to appear to talk about his recent charity work and upcoming projects. It should have been a warm, feel-good interview, the kind that makes for easy television and leaves everyone smiling. Denise Welch was in the anchor seat that day, flanked by fellow panelists Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. The four women had their notes ready, their questions prepared, and their professional smiles fixed firmly in place as the show's theme music played and the cameras went live. "Welcome back to Loose Women," Denise announced to the camera with practiced enthusiasm. "Now, we have a very special guest joining us today. He's a musical legend, a knight of the realm, and someone who has given us some of the most iconic songs of all time. Please welcome the one and only Sir Elton John." The audience erupted in applause as Elton walked onto the set. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a sharp suit with his signature flamboyant glasses. He waved to the crowd, his smile genuine and warm, clearly in good spirits. He made his way to the guest chair, shaking hands with each of the panelists before taking a seat. "Elton, thank you so much for being here," Ruth said warmly, clearly excited to have such a prestigious guest on the show. "My pleasure," Elton replied, settling into his chair. "Always nice to be back on British television." There was a brief moment of pleasant small talk. Kay asked about his flight in, Janet mentioned seeing him perform years ago, and the atmosphere seemed light and friendly. But then Denise took control of the conversation, and the tone shifted almost immediately. "So, Elton," Denise began, leaning forward with an expression that seemed more confrontational than curious, "let's talk about your career. You've been in the music industry for, over 50 years now?" "That's right," Elton confirmed, still smiling but with a hint of caution creeping into his voice. "It's been quite a journey." "Quite a journey indeed," Denise continued, her voice taking on an edge that made the other panelists exchange quick glances. "But don't you think, at your age, it might be time to step aside and let some younger artists have their moment? I mean, how long can you really keep going?" The studio fell silent. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ruth's eyes widened in shock, and Janet actually turned to look at Denise with visible disbelief. Elton's smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" Elton asked, clearly taken aback by the question. "Well, it's just that you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." Denise pressed on, seemingly oblivious to or uncaring about the discomfort she was causing. "Don't you think the music industry has moved on? Your style of music, it's very dated, isn't it?" "Denise?" Ruth interjected quickly, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I don't think that's quite fair. Elton's music is timeless. His recent shows have been selling out arenas worldwide. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Denise shot back, waving off Ruth's attempt to intervene. "I mean, look at the charts today. It's all young people making music for young people. Where does someone like Elton fit into that?" Elton sat up straighter in his chair, his expression hardening. "Someone like me?" he repeated, his voice calm but with an unmistakable undercurrent of irritation. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "You know what I mean," Denise said dismissively. "You're from a different era. The world has moved on. Maybe your time in the spotlight has passed." Kay Adams jumped in, clearly trying to salvage the interview. "Elton, your charity work has been incredible. The Elton John AIDS Foundation has raised millions. Can we talk about that?" "Yes, let's talk about that," Elton agreed, grateful for the lifeline. "The foundation has been one of the most important parts of my life. We've been able to fund research, provide support for those affected by HIV and AIDS, and really make a difference in people's lives." But Denise wasn't ready to let go of her confrontational approach. "But isn't it true that some people have criticized the foundation? There have been questions about where the money actually goes, haven't there?" Elton's face flushed. Excuse me? What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Denise said with false innocence. I'm just asking the questions that people want answered. There have been articles, haven't there? Questions about transparency? That is absolutely not true, Elton said firmly, his patience clearly wearing thin. The foundation is completely transparent. Every penny is accounted for, and we've published detailed reports on our spending. This is an outrageous accusation to make. Ruth tried again to intervene. Denise, I think we should move on. Elton, your husband David, how is he? And your children, they must be growing up so fast. They're wonderful, thank you, Elton said, his voice softening slightly as he spoke about his family. Being a father has been the greatest joy of my life. My boys are everything to me. Must be hard, though, Denise cut in again, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. Raising children at your age. I mean, you're what, 70-something? Will you even be around to see them graduate? That's quite selfish, isn't it, having children when you're so old? The gasp from the audience was audible. Ruth put her hand over her mouth in shock. Janet actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. Kay looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Even the crew members behind the cameras were exchanging horrified looks. Elton stared at Denise for a long moment, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Did you actually just say that to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm just being honest," Denise said, shrugging as if she'd merely commented on the weather. "It's what people think. Having children in your 60s, it's not exactly conventional, is it? Those poor boys will probably lose their father while they're still young." "That is completely out of line," Janet finally spoke up, her voice sharp. "Denise, you can't say things like that." "Why not?" Denise challenged. "We're supposed to have honest conversations on this show, aren't we? Or are we only allowed to ask softball questions when we have a celebrity on?" Elton stood up abruptly, pulling off his microphone. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I came here as a guest, expecting a respectful conversation, and instead I'm being attacked with baseless accusations and personal insults." "Oh, sit down," Denise said dismissively. "You're being oversensitive. Can't handle a little honest criticism?" "Honest criticism?" Elton repeated incredulously. "You've questioned my relevance, attacked my charity work with lies, and then had the audacity to suggest I'm selfish for having children. That's not criticism, that's just cruel." Ruth stood up, as well, reaching out to Elton. "Please, Elton, we're so sorry. This isn't how this was supposed to go." "You're absolutely right, it wasn't." Elton agreed, looking at Ruth with sympathy. "I feel for you, having to sit next to someone who thinks this is acceptable behavior." Denise rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You celebrities are all the same. You want everyone to worship you and never ask any difficult questions." "Well, sorry, but that's not how real journalism works." "Real journalism?" Janet scoffed. "This isn't journalism, Denise. This is just you being unnecessarily nasty to a guest." "I'm being real," Denise insisted. "Someone has to be." Kay finally found her voice again. "Elton, please accept our apologies. This has been completely inappropriate." "I appreciate that, Kay," Elton said, his voice calmer now but still firm. "But I won't be disrespected like this. Not by anyone." He turned to walk off the set, and Denise called after him. "What, you're just going to leave? Can't handle the heat?" Elton stopped and turned back to face her. "No, Denise, I can handle plenty. What I won't handle is someone who thinks it's acceptable to insult a guest under the guise of asking tough questions. There's a difference between holding someone accountable and just being mean-spirited, and you've crossed that line repeatedly in the last few minutes." "I think you're being dramatic," Denise said, crossing her arms. "All I did was ask some questions." "You questioned my right to be a father," Elton said, his voice rising. "You suggested my children were better off without me. You attacked my life's work in AIDS research with completely false information. Those aren't questions, Denise. Those are attacks." Ruth stepped forward, placing herself between Elton and Denise. "Elton, you're absolutely right. I'm mortified by what's happened here today." "As am I," Janet added. "This is not what Loose Women is supposed to be about." Denise laughed bitterly. "Oh, so now you're all turning on me?" "Typical. The moment someone dares to speak their mind, everyone else falls in line to protect the celebrity." "Speaking your mind is one thing," Kay said quietly but firmly. "Being cruel is another." "And you were cruel, Denise." I was honest, Denise shot back. No, Elton interjected, his voice cutting through the argument. You were hurtful, and there's a world of difference. Honesty without compassion is just cruelty dressed up in different clothes. The audience began to applaud, starting slowly but building to a sustained clapping that showed clearly where their sympathies lay. Elton acknowledged them with a small nod, then turned back to the panel. Ruth, Janet, Kay, it was lovely to meet you all, and I'm sorry our time together was cut short by these circumstances, he said graciously. Then he looked at Denise one last time. As for you, I hope you take some time to reflect on how you treat people. Fame and success don't make someone immune to basic human decency, but they also don't give you the right to tear others down for entertainment. I don't need a lecture from you, Denise snapped. Clearly you do, Janet muttered, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Elton shook his head sadly. You know what the real tragedy is here? I came to talk about work that saves lives. The foundation has helped millions of people around the world. We've funded breakthrough research. We've provided care and support to communities that desperately need it. And we've fought stigma and discrimination. That's what I wanted to talk about today. Instead, I've spent the last several minutes defending myself against baseless attacks and cruel personal comments. If you had just answered the questions, Denise started, but Ruth cut her off. Stop it, Denise. Just stop. You've done enough damage. The producer's voice could be heard off camera, clearly panicked, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. The audience was murmuring among themselves, some calling out in support of Elton, others expressing their disappointment in how the interview had unfolded. Elton took a deep breath, composing himself. I've been in this industry for over 5 decades. I've faced criticism, I've dealt with controversy, and I've learned how to navigate the media landscape. But I've also learned that you don't have to tolerate disrespect, no matter who it's coming from or what platform they have. Bravo! Someone in the audience shouted, and others joined in with applause and cheers. Denise looked around, seeming to finally realize that the room had completely turned against her. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. Your job is to interview guests, not to insult them, Janet said flatly. There's a reason people tune in to watch these shows, and it's not to see someone get torn down for no reason. Kay nodded in agreement. Elton has been nothing but gracious since he walked onto this set. He didn't deserve any of what just happened. Thank you, Elton said to them both. I really do appreciate that. He looked out at the audience. And thank you all for your support. It means more than you know. Another round of applause erupted, this time even louder than before. Several audience members stood up, and soon the entire audience was on their feet, giving Elton a standing ovation as he prepared to leave the set. Denise remained seated, her expression a mixture of defiance and growing realization that she had badly miscalculated. You're all being ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. No, Denise, Ruth said firmly. For once, we're being exactly what we should be. Decent human beings who recognize when someone has been treated poorly. Elton picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and draped it over his arm. I wish you all the best, he said to the panel, pointedly excluding Denise from his gaze. And to everyone watching at home, please remember to support AIDS research and awareness. The fight isn't over, and every contribution, no matter how small, makes a difference. Even in the midst of his departure, he was using his platform to promote the cause he cared so deeply about. The audience responded with more applause and several shouts of support. As Elton walked toward the exit, Denise made one final attempt to have the last word. Running away, are we? Can't handle a real conversation? Elton paused at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. Denise, I've handled more real conversations in my life than you could possibly imagine. I've spoken with world leaders about policy, with doctors about medical breakthroughs, with families who have lost loved ones to AIDS. I've had difficult, challenging, important conversations that have actually mattered and made a difference in the world. What I won't do is waste my time with someone who mistakes cruelty for courage and thinks that being provocative is the same as being profound. The audience erupted again, their support for Elton absolutely clear. Several people were shouting their agreement. Others were booing Denise's behavior, and the energy in the studio was electric with tension and emotion. Ruth had tears in her eyes. Elton, I am so sorry. Please know that this doesn't represent what we're about. I believe you, Ruth, Elton said kindly. I can see that you and the others are genuinely good people who were put in an impossible situation today." Janet stood up and walked over to Elton, extending her hand. "It's been an honor, even under these circumstances. Your dignity in the face of this nonsense has been remarkable." Elton shook her hand warmly. "Thank you, Janet. That means a lot." Kay also stood, joining them. "We'll do better. We have to do better." "I hope you will," Elton said. "Because platforms like this, they matter. They reach millions of people. What you say and how you treat people, it has an impact. Use that responsibility wisely." Denise finally stood up as well, but instead of apologizing or backing down, she doubled down. "I still don't think I did anything wrong. I asked legitimate questions." "Legitimate questions?" Elton repeated, his voice rising again. "You told me I was too old to be relevant. You spread lies about my charity work. You suggested my children would be better off if I hadn't been their father. In what world are those legitimate questions?" "They're things people wonder about," Denise insisted. "No, they're things you wondered about," Janet corrected her sharply. "Don't pretend you're speaking for anyone but yourself." The producer's voice came through again, more insistent this time, clearly trying to get the show to cut to commercial or somehow regain control of the situation. But the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Elton shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "You know, Denise, I actually feel sorry for you. Because somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that being harsh and confrontational makes you a better interviewer. But all it does is make you someone people will remember for all the wrong reasons. When people talk about this interview years from now, they won't remember you as the tough journalist who asked the hard questions. They'll remember you as the person who was unnecessarily cruel to a guest who came here in good faith." "I don't care what people think," Denise said, but the slight waver in her voice suggested otherwise. "That's your problem right there," Kay said quietly. "You should care. We should all care about how we treat people and how our actions affect others." Elton looked around the studio one more time, taking in the scene. The audience still standing and applauding him. The panelists divided between those who were mortified and the one who remained defiant. The crew members who had stopped pretending to work and were just watching the spectacle unfold. "I've been blessed with an incredible career," Elton said, his voice carrying clearly through the studio. "I've played for royalty and regular people. I've performed in stadiums and small clubs. I've won awards and broken records. But you know what I'm most proud of? The fact that through it all, I've tried to treat people with respect and kindness. I haven't always succeeded. I'm human, and I've made mistakes. But I've tried. And that's all any of us can do. Try to be better. Try to be kinder. Try to lift others up instead of tearing them down." The applause grew even louder, if that was possible. Several audience members were wiping away tears, moved by Elton's words and his grace under fire. "That's all very nice," Denise said sarcastically, "but we're supposed to be journalists here, not cheerleaders." "There's a difference between journalism and antagonism," Ruth said, her voice sharp now. "And you crossed that line today, Denise, multiple times." Elton took a step toward the exit, then turned back one more time. "I want to say something to anyone watching at home who might be going through a difficult time. Anyone who feels marginalized or attacked or dismissed because of who they are or how old they are or any other aspect of their identity. You matter. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions of you. Live your truth, love who you love, and don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are." The message clearly resonated with many in the audience, judging by their emotional reactions. Several people called out thank you, others applauded, and the overwhelming feeling in the room was one of support and solidarity with Elton. Denise rolled her eyes. "Now he's giving a speech. This is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous?" Janet said coldly. "Is that you still don't see what you've done wrong. That's the truly frightening part of all this." Elton smiled at Janet, appreciating her support. "Thank you for standing up for what's right. That takes courage, especially in a situation like this." "It shouldn't take courage to call out bad behavior," Janet replied. "It should just be the default." Kay nodded in agreement. "We owe our audience better than what happened here today. We owe our guests better. We owe ourselves better." "Speak for yourselves," Denise muttered. But she was clearly in the minority now, and she knew it. The producer finally managed to get through, and there was a flurry of activity as crew members rushed around trying to figure out what to do next. The show was clearly not going to continue as planned. The carefully scripted segments and prepared discussions were out the window. Elton used the moment of chaos to make his final exit. "Ladies, it's been memorable. I wish you all well." Again, his gaze skipped over Denise, making it clear who was included in that well wish and who was not. As he walked off the set, the audience gave him one final standing ovation. The applause followed him all the way out, a thunderous send-off that spoke volumes about where the public's sympathies lay. Ruth and Janet were also clapping, while Kay looked like she was fighting back tears. Only Denise remained unmoved, arms crossed, expression stubborn. The moment Elton disappeared from view, the studio erupted into chaos. Audience members were talking loudly among themselves, some upset, some angry, all having witnessed something completely unexpected. The other panelists immediately turned on Denise, their voices raised as they demanded to know what she had been thinking. "That was completely uncalled for," Ruth said, her voice shaking with anger. "How could you treat a guest that way?" "He's a public figure," Denise said defensively. "He should be able to handle tough questions." "Those weren't tough questions," Kay shot back. "They were personal attacks disguised as questions." "There's a huge difference." Janet leaned forward, her expression furious. "You questioned his right to be a father, Denise, his right to have children because of his age. That's not journalism, that's just being cruel." "I was being provocative," Denise argued. "That's what gets people talking." "Oh, people will definitely be talking," Ruth said bitterly, "but not in the way you think. They'll be talking about how one of the world's most beloved musicians was treated with complete disrespect on our show." The producer's voice came through the speakers again, this time telling them they were cutting to an early commercial break and that they needed to figure out how to proceed with the rest of the show. The cameras finally stopped rolling, but the damage was done. Audience members were already pulling out their phones, no doubt sharing what they'd just witnessed on social media. The story was going to spread fast, and the fallout was going to be significant, but that was later. In the moment, all anyone could focus on was the shocking confrontation they'd just witnessed and the dignified way Elton John had handled himself in the face of such unprovoked hostility. The other panelists continued to confront Denise, their anger and disappointment clear, but Denise remained defiant, convinced that she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd simply been doing her job as a broadcaster. The disconnect between her perception and reality was stark and troubling. Meanwhile, somewhere backstage, Elton John was likely processing what had just happened, surrounded by his team, preparing to leave the building and put this whole uncomfortable experience behind him. He had come to talk about charity and music and ended up having to defend his very existence as a father and his relevance as an artist. The whole incident had lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish, but it would be remembered for years to come as one of the most shocking moments in British talk show history. Not because of scandal or revelation, but because of how quickly a friendly interview had turned hostile and how one person's inability to show basic respect had created an unforgettable television moment for all the wrong reasons. The audience was slowly being ushered out of the studio, many of them still talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. Some were expressing their support for Elton, others their disgust at how he'd been treated. A few were questioning how something like this could have happened on a show that was supposed to be about light, friendly conversation. Back on the set, the argument between Denise and the other panelists continued. Ruth was particularly upset, her professional demeanor cracking as she expressed her frustration with how the interview had gone. Janet was more angry than upset, her sharp tongue cutting through Denise's excuses and justifications. Kay seemed caught between the two emotions, both hurt and furious at the same time. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Ruth asked. "Denise, do you understand the damage this has caused?" "I did my job." Denise insisted stubbornly. "I asked questions." "You attacked a guest," Janet corrected. "There's a difference, and if you can't see that, then that's a problem." The studio crew was packing up equipment, their faces showing a mixture of shock, concern, and, in some cases, barely suppressed excitement at having witnessed such dramatic television. Everyone knew they'd just been part of something that would be talked about for a long time. Producers and executives were no doubt already in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to handle the public relations nightmare that was about to unfold. The clip would be everywhere within hours. The headlines would write themselves, and questions would be asked about how such a situation had been allowed to develop in the first place. But none of that changed what had happened. Elton John, one of the most respected and beloved figures in music history, had walked. onto a talk show expecting a normal, friendly interview and had instead been subjected to a series of personal attacks and inappropriate questions. And when he'd finally had enough and stood up for himself, he'd done so with a grace and dignity that had won over everyone in that studio, except the person who had caused the problem in the first place. The confrontation had exposed a fundamental truth about the difference between holding people accountable and simply being cruel for the sake of being provocative. It had shown the importance of treating guests, no matter how famous, with basic respect and courtesy. And it had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful response to hostility is simply to refuse to engage with it and to walk away with your dignity intact. As the last audience members filed out and the crew finished packing up, the studio felt different somehow. The air was still charged with the energy of what had just transpired. Everyone who had been there would have a story to tell, a moment of unexpected drama that they'd witnessed firsthand. And somewhere, Elton John was probably already moving on with his day, secure in the knowledge that he'd handled a difficult situation with class, and that the court of public opinion would almost certainly be on his side. He'd defended himself without lowering himself to the level of his attacker. He'd stood up for his family, his work, and his dignity. And he'd done it all in front of cameras and a live audience, showing everyone watching exactly how to respond when someone crosses the line. The incident would become a teaching moment, whether Denise wanted it to be or not. It would spark conversations about how we treat public figures, about the line between tough journalism and bullying, about respect and human decency. It would be analyzed and discussed and debated. But at its core, it was simply a story of one person being unnecessarily cruel to another, and that other person deciding they didn't have to tolerate it. It was a reminder that everyone, regardless of fame or success, deserves to be treated with basic respect. And it was a demonstration that walking away from a toxic situation isn't weakness, it's strength. The show would go on without Elton John that day, scrambling to fill the time and manage the fallout. The other panelists would continue, subdued and shaken by what had happened. Denise would maintain her position that she'd done nothing wrong, at least publicly, though privately she might begin to realize the magnitude of her mistake. And the audience, both those who had been in the studio and those who would eventually see the footage online, would remember this as the day that Elton John was pushed too far by a talk show host who thought provocation was the same as good television, and how he responded with a quiet strength that was far more powerful than any angry outburst could have been.